Esmeralda's fingers, usually nimble with a needle and thread, trembled slightly as she smoothed the worn fabric of her late father's vest. Each tiny stitch she made was usually a source of comfort, a way to create something beautiful and strong. But today, the needle felt heavy, each prick a reminder of her loss. Her father, a lovable rogue and notorious gambler, had passed away just weeks ago, leaving behind a legacy of tall tales and even taller debts. Esmeralda wasn't concerned about most of the debts. She could manage, she always had. What worried her, what twisted her stomach into knots, was the contested claim to the Lucky Star gold mine. It was a small claim, yes, but it was asterisk her father's. He dreamed of striking it rich, of finally providing a life of ease for them both. Now that dream, that claim, was being challenged by Silas Grimbley, a man whose heart was as black as coal dust. Grimbley claimed her father had lost the claim in a game Esmeralda knew her father would never have agreed to. He might gamble away his spare coins, but the Lucky Star? Never. Grimbley, slick as a snake, was trying to take what was rightfully hers. Esmeralda had tried reasoning with him, pleading with him, even offering him what little money she had. But Grimbley just sneered, his eyes glinting with greed. "The only way you'll get that claim back, little lady," he'd said, "is if you win it back, at the Golden Nugget Saloon, tonight." Esmeralda had never held a playing card in her life, beyond building flimsy houses with them as a child. Saloons were places she avoided, filled with smoke, shouting, and the kind of men her father warned her about. But the Lucky Star was more than just a piece of land. It was her father's legacy, a symbol of their shared dreams. She wouldn't let Grimbley steal it, so Esmeralda made a decision. She would go to the Golden Nugget, she would play poker. And she would win back what was hers. It was a gamble, a dangerous one, but she was ready to stitch together a plan, thread by thread, and fight for her father's memory. The Lucky Star gold mine wasn't much to look at. A patch of dusty land nestled in the foothills, marked by a rickety wooden frame and a small, almost invisible opening in the earth. But to Esmeralda's father, it was a treasure chest waiting to be unlocked. He'd spent years prospecting, dreaming of the day he'd strike the mother lode. He'd even given Esmeralda a tiny gold nugget he'd found, telling her to keep it close as a reminder that even the smallest things could hold immense value. That nugget now lay tucked safely in her pocket, a tangible reminder of what she was fighting for. It wasn't just about the gold, though a little gold would certainly ease her worries. It was about honoring her father's memory, about proving that Grimbley couldn't just bully his way into taking what wasn't his. The claim itself was simple enough. A legal document filed with the county clerk stating that her father, Jedediah Willow, owned the rights to mine the land. Grimbley's claim rested on a supposed IOU, a signed chit claiming Jedediah owed him a vast sum of money. A sum, Esmeralda suspected, Grimbley had fabricated after her father's passing. What made the situation even more difficult was the general sentiment in town. Jedediah, despite his charm and good humor, wasn't exactly known for his responsible financial decisions. Many whispered that he probably had gambled away the claim. That Grimbley, as much as they disliked him, might be within his rights, but Esmeralda knew better. She knew her father. He wouldn't risk the Lucky Star, not for anything. And she was determined to prove it, even if it meant facing down the most intimidating men in town in the smoky depths of the Golden Nugget. She spent the afternoon carefully mending her best dress, a simple blue cotton gown, adding a few subtle embellishments, a touch of lace here, a delicate stitch there. She needed to look presentable, confident, even though her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Tonight she wouldn't just be a seamstress. She'd be a gambler, a fighter, a daughter defending her father's name. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Esmeralda walked towards the Golden Nugget. The sounds of raucous laughter and clinking glasses spilled out into the street, a stark contrast to the quiet grief she'd been living in. She clutched her small purse, containing the savings she'd carefully accumulated over years of meticulous stitching. It wasn't much, but it was all she had to wager. She paused outside the saloon doors, taking a deep breath. The air hung thick with the smells of stale beer, cheap cigars, and something else, desperation. She could turn back. No one would blame her. It was a fool's errand, a lamb venturing into a den of wolves. But the thought of Grimbley gloating over his ill-gotten gains, of her father's memory being tarnished, spurred her forward. Taking another deep breath, Esmeralda pushed open the saloon doors. The noise hit her like a wall. Men crowded around tables, their faces illuminated by flickering gas lamps. Cards slapped against wood, coins clinked, and shouts of triumph or groans of defeat filled the air. It was a chaotic, overwhelming scene. She spotted Grimbley almost immediately. He sat at a table in the center of the room, surrounded by other men, a smug look on his face. He was already dealing cards, his thick fingers shuffling the deck with practiced ease. He looked like he belonged there, like he was born to cheat and swindle. Esmeralda's heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to take a step forward. She had a plan, as fragile as spun silk, but a plan nonetheless. She would observe, she would learn, and she would find a way to use her wits, her needle-sharp focus, to unravel Grimbley's scheme and reclaim what was rightfully hers. It would be the most daring piece of needlework she'd ever attempted, a delicate dance between risk and reward, bluff and bravery. And she wouldn't let her father down. Esmeralda stood near the edge of the room, trying to make herself invisible. The sheer number of people was overwhelming. Rough-looking men with weathered faces and calloused hands, fancy gentlemen in tailored suits, and even a few elegantly dressed women, their faces hidden behind painted fans. All were united by one thing, the thrill of the gamble. She watched Grimbley's game for a few minutes, trying to decipher the rules. Men threw chips into the center of the table, some nervously, some with a swagger. They squinted at their cards, muttered to themselves, and occasionally roared with laughter or cursed under their breath. It seemed a confusing mix of luck and strategy. She noticed a smaller game starting up at a nearby table. The stakes seemed lower, the players less intimidating. It was a table where a newcomer might be able to blend in, to learn the ropes without losing everything in a single hand. Taking another deep breath, Esmeralda approached the table. A wizened old man with a handlebar mustache looked up at her, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "Well now," he chuckled, "what have we here? A little sparrow come to play with the eagles." Esmeralda managed a weak smile. I'd like to join," she stammered. The old man raised an eyebrow. "Never played before, have you?" Esmeralda hesitated, then nodded. Honesty, she decided, was the best policy, at least for now. "No, sir, but I'm a quick learner." The old man chuckled again. "All right, little sparrow, pull up a chair, but don't say I didn't warn you. This game can be as prickly as a cactus." He gestured to an empty seat. "Name, Clem, by the way." Esmeralda sat down, her hands trembling slightly. "Esmeralda Willow." Clem nodded. "All right, Esmeralda, let's see if you can weave a winning hand." He winked, and Esmeralda knew she'd found a small, unlikely ally in this den of gamblers. Now the real game could begin. The Golden Nugget was a world of its own, a place where fortunes were won and lost with the turn of a card. The air hung heavy, a swirling mix of tobacco smoke, cheap whiskey, and unwashed bodies. It stung Esmeralda's eyes and tickled her nose, a far cry from the clean, airy workshop where she usually spent her days. The saloon was lit by flickering gas lamps, casting long, dancing shadows across the room. The walls were stained with age and adorned with faded posters advertising everything from traveling circuses to miracle cures. A large, ornate mirror behind the bar reflected the chaotic scene, doubling the number of faces and magnifying the sense of unease. Everywhere she looked, Esmeralda saw characters. There was the burly blacksmith, his face scarred and his hands like gnarled tree branches, nursing a glass of something dark and potent. A pair of cowboys, still dusty from the trail, argued loudly over a hand of cards, their spurs jingling with every movement. And then there was the mysterious woman in the red dress, her face veiled, her eyes glittering like diamonds as she surveyed the room. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Every hand played, every bet placed, carried the weight of hope and despair. Fortunes could change in an instant, and the stakes were always high. Esmeralda could feel the desperation radiating from the other players, the raw hunger for a win, the fear of losing everything. Even Clem, with his twinkling eyes and friendly smile, seemed different in this environment. He was still kind, still helpful, but there was a sharp edge to his gaze, a hint of the gambler beneath the grandfatherly exterior. He was a survivor, a seasoned player who knew the rules of this dangerous game. Esmeralda knew she had to be careful. She was an outsider, a lamb in a den of wolves. But she also knew that she had something the others didn't, a burning determination, a quiet strength forged in the fires of grief and injustice. And she was ready to use it. The golden nugget might be intimidating, but Esmeralda Willow was not easily intimidated. Clem patiently explained the basics of the game: 5-card draw, high hand wins, betting rounds. It sounded simple enough, but Esmeralda quickly realized there was more to it than just luck. It was about reading people, about understanding their tells, about knowing when to hold M and when to fold M, as Clem put it. Esmeralda watched the other players carefully, her keen eyes taking in every detail. She noticed how the blacksmith's hand trembled slightly when he held a good hand, how the cowboy's eyes darted to his chips before making a big bet, how the mysterious woman in red always took a slow, deliberate sip of her drink when she was bluffing. It was like examining a piece of fabric, she thought, searching for imperfections, for loose threads that revealed the underlying structure. She was used to studying patterns, to noticing the subtle differences that separated a well-made garment from a shoddy one. Now, she was applying those same skills to the faces around the poker table. Clem called it reading the players. Esmeralda thought of it more as seaming them, finding the hidden stitches that held their composure together, the weak points that could be unraveled with a well-placed bet. She started small, betting cautiously, testing the waters. She lost a few hands, but she wasn't discouraged. Each loss was a lesson, a chance to refine her technique, to tighten her stitches. She paid close attention to Clem's advice, absorbing his wisdom like a sponge. He pointed out subtle cues she had missed, helped her understand the nuances of betting strategy. Slowly, Esmeralda began to feel more confident. She started to anticipate the other players' moves, to predict their bluffs. She even managed to win a few small pots, the clinking of the coins a sweet sound in the smoky air. She wasn't just a seamstress anymore. She was a student of the game, a weaver of fortunes, and she was ready to take on Grimbley. Esmeralda's first few hands were a disaster. She fumbled with the cards, misread her opponents, and generally played like the novice she was. She lost small amounts, a few coins here, a few chips there, but the losses added up. Her purse felt lighter with each passing hand, and a knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. Clem offered words of encouragement, but Esmeralda could see the doubt in his eyes. He probably thought she was in over her head, a naive girl playing a game she didn't understand. And maybe he was right. Across the room, Esmeralda noticed Grimbley watching her. He was still at his high-stakes table, raking in chips with a triumphant grin. He saw her struggling, saw her losing, and a cruel smile spread across his face. He probably thought she was an easy mark, a lamb ripe for the slaughter. And that's exactly what Esmeralda wanted him to think. Her early losses weren't just bad luck. They were part of her plan. She was deliberately playing poorly, creating the illusion of weakness. She wanted Grimbley to underestimate her, to see her as a harmless amateur who posed no threat. She was laying the groundwork for her con, carefully stitching together a tapestry of deception. She deliberately hesitated before betting, as if unsure of her hand. She sighed dramatically when she folded, as if disappointed by her cards. She even spilled her drink once, creating a clumsy distraction. All of it was an act, a carefully crafted performance designed to lull Grimbley into a false sense of security. She was a seamstress, after all. She knew how to create illusions, how to make something appear one way when it was really something else entirely. And tonight she was creating the illusion of a losing gambler, a perfect target for the greedy Mr. Grimbley. The bait was set. Now all she had to do was wait for him to take it. The moment had come. Esmeralda straightened her back, took a deep breath, and prepared to change her tactics. No more clumsy mistakes, no more nervous sighs. It was time to show Grimbley and everyone else in the saloon that she was more than just a simple seamstress. She picked up her cards, her fingers surprisingly steady. A pair of sevens, a queen, a jack, and a 10. Not a great hand, but not terrible either. She discarded the queen, jack, and 10, hoping to draw something better. The new cards arrived, a 2 and a 5, a truly awful hand, but Esmeralda didn't flinch. She maintained a calm, almost serene expression, the same expression she wore when threading a needle in low light or mending a delicate lace. It was the face of focus, of precision, of unwavering determination. She looked at the other players, her eyes narrowed slightly. The blacksmith was sweating, his face flushed. The cowboy was nervously tapping his foot. Clem, ever the observant mentor, gave her a subtle nod of encouragement. Esmeralda pushed a stack of chips into the center of the table, a bold bet, especially for someone who had been losing all night. The other players hesitated, their eyes widening in surprise. "I'll see that," the blacksmith grumbled, reluctantly matching her bet. The cowboy folded, muttering something about bad luck. Clem stayed in, his expression unreadable. Esmeralda's heart pounded, but she kept her face impassive. This was it, her first real bluff. She had nothing, but she had to make them believe she had everything. It was like creating a beautiful gown from scraps of fabric, using skill and imagination to transform something ordinary into something extraordinary. She met the blacksmith's gaze, her eyes unwavering. She projected confidence, strength, and a hint of ruthless determination. She was no longer the timid seamstress. She was a force to be reckoned with, and it worked. The blacksmith squirmed under her gaze, his hand trembling slightly. Finally, he folded, throwing his cards onto the table with a frustrated sigh. Only Clem remained. He studied her for a long moment, his eyes searching for any sign of weakness. But Esmeralda held her ground, her face a mask of composure. Finally, Clem smiled. "I believe you, Esmeralda," he said, folding his cards. "You've got a sharp needle, little sparrow." Esmeralda raked in the chips, her heart soaring. Her first bluff, and she had pulled it off. She glanced across the room at Grimbley. He was still watching her, his expression now a mixture of curiosity and unease. He was starting to realize that she wasn't as naive as she seemed, and that was exactly what she wanted. Grimbley, finally tiring of his own game, swaggered over to Esmeralda's table. "All right, little lady," he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Ready to play with the big boys?" Esmeralda met his gaze, her eyes filled with a quiet determination. "I'm ready," she said, her voice clear and steady. The other players, sensing a showdown, quickly folded, leaving Esmeralda and Grimbley alone. Clem watched from the sidelines, his expression a mixture of concern and encouragement. The stakes were raised considerably. This wasn't just about a few coins anymore. This was about the lucky star, about her father's legacy. The dealer pushed a small, worn deed into the center of the table, the lucky star claim. The first cards were dealt. Esmeralda peeked at hers, a pair of queens, a 6, a 4, and a 3, a decent starting hand but nothing spectacular. Grimbley smirked, his eyes glinting with confidence. He opened the betting with a large pile of chips, a clear attempt to intimidate her. Esmeralda didn't flinch. She matched his bet, her hands steady as she pushed her chips forward. She discarded the 6, 4, and 3, hoping to draw a third queen or even an ace. The tension in the room was palpable. Even the saloon's usual din seemed to fade away as everyone focused on the two players facing off across the table. The new cards arrived. Esmeralda slowly turned them over. A 7 and an 8, her heart sank. Her hand was still just a pair of queens. Grimbley, seeing her hesitation, raised the bet again, even higher this time. "What's the matter, little lady?" he taunted, feeling the pressure. Esmeralda's mind raced. She could fold, cut her losses, and walk away. But that would mean giving up on her father, giving up on the lucky star. She couldn't do that. She looked at Grimbley, his face flushed with arrogance, his eyes filled with greed. She thought of her father, his calloused hands, his unwavering belief in the lucky star. She thought of the gold nugget in her pocket, a symbol of hope and resilience. And she made a decision. She would bluff, she would risk everything. With a calm that surprised even herself, Esmeralda pushed all of her remaining chips into the center of the table. "I'm all in," she said, her voice barely a whisper but carrying the weight of a mountain. Grimbli's eyes widened. He stared at her, trying to decipher her expression. Was she bluffing? Did she have a winning hand? He couldn't tell. He hesitated, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. He looked at the deed to the lucky star, then back at Esmeralda. The sweat was beading on his forehead. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Esmeralda held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. It was the most daring stitch she had ever attempted, a delicate thread holding together her hopes and her fears. The entire saloon seemed to be holding its breath with her. Grimly wiped his brow, his eyes darting back and forth between Esmeralda and the pile of chips in the center of the table. He chewed on his lip, a vein throbbing in his forehead. He was clearly torn. Finally, with a groan of frustration, he threw his cards face down onto the table. "I fold," he roared, slamming his fist on the wood. A collective gasp swept through the saloon. Esmeralda had done it. She had bluffed Grimly out of the hand, out of the lucky star claim. A wave of relief washed over her, so intense it almost buckled her knees. She had won. She had honored her father's memory. She had defied the odds and outsmarted the greediest man in town. Clem rushed over to her, his face beaming. "I knew you could do it, little sparrow," he exclaimed, clapping her on the back. "You've got more grit than a gold miner's." Esmeralda managed a weak smile, her hand trembling as she reached for the deed to the lucky star. It was hers. Legally, rightfully hers. Grimly, however, was not taking the loss well. He jumped to his feet, his face contorted with rage. "You cheated," he bellowed, pointing a finger at Esmeralda. "I know you cheated." The saloon fell silent again as all eyes turned to Grimly. He was a large, intimidating man, and his anger was palpable. Esmeralda stood her ground, her eyes unwavering. "I didn't cheat," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I played the game and I won." "Oh, that claim is mine," Grimly roared, his face turning purple. "Your father owed me money." "My father would never have gambled away the lucky star," Esmeralda retorted, her voice rising with defiance. "And I have the deed to prove it." "Oh, She held up the document, her hand shaking slightly. The deed, the symbol of her victory, the proof of Grimbly's defeat. Grimly lunged towards her, his eyes blazing with fury. "Give me that deed," he snarled, reaching for her. But before he could reach her, Clem stepped in front of her, blocking his path. "Back off, Grimly," he said, his voice surprisingly firm. "The lady won fair and square, you need to accept it." Other men in the saloon stepped forward, siding with Clem and Esmeralda. They might not have liked Grimly, but they respected a fair game. And Esmeralda had played a fair game, a brilliant game. Grimly, outnumbered and outmaneuvered, finally backed down, his face still contorted with rage. "This isn't over," he snarled, glaring at Esmeralda. "You haven't heard the last of me." He stormed out of the saloon, leaving Esmeralda standing victorious, the deed to the lucky star clutched tightly in her hand. She had won. The claim was hers, but her night was far from over. The cheers and congratulations continued for a while, but Esmeralda felt restless. The victory, sweet as it was, felt incomplete. She had won back her father's claim, but something was still missing. As the crowd thinned, Clem approached her, his face etched with concern. "Esmeralda," he said softly, "I overheard some men talking about the Johnson family." Esmeralda frowned. "The Johnsons. What about them?" "They're in trouble," Clem explained, his voice low. "They've fallen behind on their mortgage and the bank is threatening to foreclose. They're going to be sold off their land." Esmeralda knew the Johnsons. They were a hardworking family, kind and generous, always willing to lend a helping hand. They had 3 young children, all with bright, hopeful eyes. The thought of them losing their home, their livelihood, filled Esmeralda with a sense of injustice. "When is the sale?" she asked, her voice tight. "Tomorrow morning," Clem replied. Grimbly's behind it, of course. He's been trying to buy up all the land in the valley. Esmeralda's heart sank, Grimbly again. He was like a persistent weed, always trying to choke the life out of everything around him. She thought of the money she had won tonight, the money that was supposed to secure her future, to give her a fresh start. But what good was money if others were suffering? What good was victory if it didn't help those in need? She looked at Clem, her eyes filled with a newfound determination. "I have to do something," she said, her voice firm. Clem nodded, his eyes twinkling with pride. "I knew you would, little sparrow. You've got a good heart, Esmeralda Willow, a heart as big as this whole territory." Esmeralda spent the rest of the night gathering information, learning the details of the Johnson family's debt. It was a substantial sum, but not insurmountable. She knew what she had to do. She would use her winnings to save the Johnson family. It was a gamble, a big one, but she was willing to risk everything to help those in need. The lucky star could wait. For now, there was a family to save, and Esmeralda was ready to stitch together a rescue plan, one careful stitch at a time. The next morning, Esmeralda, accompanied by Clem, arrived at the bank just as the auction was about to begin. A small crowd had gathered, their faces etched with worry and concern. The Johnson family stood huddled together, their eyes filled with despair. Grimbly stood nearby, a smug grin on his face, rubbing his hands together in anticipation. The banker, a portly man with a stern face, began the proceedings. He announced the Johnson family's debt and opened the bidding for their land. Grimbly immediately raised his hand, offering a sum that was far below the land's true value. Esmeralda stepped forward, her voice ringing with confidence. "I'll bid the full amount of their debt," she declared, her eyes fixed on the banker. A gasp went through the crowd. The banker looked surprised, Grimbly looked furious, and the Johnson family looked utterly bewildered. "Do I hear a higher bid?" the banker asked, his eyes shifting nervously between Grimbly and Esmeralda. Grimbly sputtered, his face turning red. "That's impossible," he exclaimed. "She doesn't have that kind of money." Esmeralda calmly produced the money she had won the night before, counting it out in front of the banker. It was a substantial sum, enough to cover the Johnson family's debt, and then some. The banker, after verifying the amount, declared Esmeralda the winner. A cheer erupted from the crowd as the news spread. The Johnson family rushed to Esmeralda, their faces filled with gratitude and relief. "Thank you, Miss Willow, Mrs. Johnson cried, tears streaming down her face. "You've saved us, you've saved our home." Mr. Johnson shook Esmeralda's hand, his grip firm and sincere. "We'll never forget this, Miss Willow," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "You're a true angel." Even the Johnson children, usually shy and reserved, ran to Esmeralda and hugged her legs, their faces beaming with joy. Esmeralda smiled, her heart filled with warmth. She had done it. She had saved the Johnson family. She had used her winnings for good, transforming a night of gambling into an act of kindness and compassion. Grimbly, meanwhile, stood seething with rage, his plans thwarted once again. He glared at Esmeralda, his eyes filled with hatred. "You haven't won yet, little lady," he snarled. "This town isn't big enough for both of us." But Esmeralda wasn't afraid. She had the lucky star, she had the support of the community, and she had a heart full of courage. She was ready to face whatever Grimbly threw her way. She was ready to defend her town, her friends, and her beliefs. She was ready to be more than just a seamstress. She was ready to be a hero. The Johnson family could barely contain their joy. They thanked Esmeralda repeatedly, promising to repay her kindness in any way they could. The children, especially, clung to her, their faces radiating happiness. Word of Esmeralda's generosity spread like wildfire through the town. People who had once doubted her, who had whispered about her father's gambling debts, now hailed her as a hero. They saw her as a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of courage and compassion. They contrasted her actions with those of Silas Grimbly, whose greed and ruthlessness were now on full display. He had tried to steal her father's claim. He had tried to force the Johnson family off their land, and he had consistently put his own interests above those of the community. Esmeralda Willow has more heart in her little finger than Silas Grimbley has in his whole body, declared Martha Higgins, the town's baker, as she handed Esmeralda a freshly baked pie. She's a true daughter of the West, added old man Fitzwilliam, the town's blacksmith, his voice gruff but sincere. She's got the grit and the spirit to make this town a better place. Even the skeptical townsfolk, those who had initially doubted Esmeralda's ability to win against Grimbley, were now singing her praises. They realized they had underestimated her, that beneath her quiet demeanor lay a strength and determination that rivaled the toughest frontiersmen. The town began to rally around Esmeralda, offering their support and their gratitude. Farmers brought her fresh produce, merchants offered her discounts on supplies, and the children drew her pictures and wrote her thank-you notes. Esmeralda was overwhelmed by the outpouring of affection. She had never sought fame or recognition, but she was deeply touched by the town's appreciation. She realized that she had not only saved the Johnson family, but she had also united the community, forging a bond of solidarity and shared purpose. She was no longer just a seamstress. She was a lighter, an inspiration, a beacon of hope in a town that desperately needed one. And she was ready to embrace her new role to continue fighting for justice and fairness, one careful stitch at a time. The community's admiration was a badge of honor. Grimbley, however, was not one to give up easily. He tried to discredit Esmeralda, spreading rumors and lies about her father, about her, and about the Johnson family. He claimed she had cheated at poker, that the money she used to buy the debt was ill-gotten, and that the Johnsons were lazy and undeserving of charity. He even went so far as to file a formal complaint with the town council, demanding that Esmeralda be investigated for fraud. He hoped to turn the town against her, to undermine her newfound popularity, and to reclaim his position of power. But the townspeople were not buying it. They had seen Grimbley's true colors, and they were not about to let him bully Esmeralda or the Johnson family. They had been inspired by Esmeralda's defiance, by her courage to stand up to injustice, and they were ready to stand up for her in return. When Grimbley presented his complaint to the town council, the room was packed with supporters of Esmeralda and the Johnson family. Martha Higgins, the baker, brought a plate of her famous apple pies, symbolizing Esmeralda's sweetness and generosity. Old man Fitzwilliam, the blacksmith, brought his hammer, symbolizing the town's strength and resilience. And the Johnson children brought a bouquet of wildflowers, symbolizing their gratitude and their hope for the future. One by one, the townspeople spoke out in support of Esmeralda, praising her kindness, her courage, and her unwavering commitment to justice. They recounted her daring bluff at the Golden Nugget, her selfless act of saving the Johnson family, and her unwavering spirit in the face of adversity. Esmeralda Willow is the best thing that's happened to this town in years, declared Martha Higgins, her voice ringing with passion. She's shown us what it means to be a true neighbor, a true friend, a true hero. Grimbley is just jealous, added old man Fitzwilliam, his voice gruff but firm. He can't stand to see someone else doing good because he's too busy trying to line his own pockets. Even the skeptical townsfolk, those who had once doubted Esmeralda, now spoke out in her defense, admitting that they had been wrong and praising her for proving them wrong. Faced with such overwhelming opposition, Grimbley's complaint quickly fell apart. The town council, recognizing the will of the people, dismissed his complaint and publicly commended Esmeralda for her contributions to the community. Grimbley stormed out of the town hall, his face contorted with rage. He had underestimated the power of community, the strength of shared purpose, and the unwavering spirit of Esmeralda Willow. He had tried to tear them down, but instead he had only made them stronger. The town was united against him, inspired by Esmeralda's defiance, and he knew that he was losing his grip on power. Esmeralda's life had changed dramatically. She was no longer just a seamstress, quietly mending clothes and dreaming of a better future. She was a symbol of hope, a beacon of justice, a leader in her community. People came to her with their problems, seeking her advice and her help. Farmers who were struggling to make ends meet families who were facing eviction, and individuals who had been wronged by Grimbley or his cronies. Esmeralda listened patiently, offering what assistance she could, whether it was a loan, a legal referral, or simply a listening ear. She used her sewing skills to help those in need, mending clothes for the poor, creating blankets for the homeless, and even designing new outfits for the local school children. She organized community events, bringing people together to celebrate their shared values and to support those who were struggling. She became a powerful advocate for the underdog, fighting for fairness and equality and challenging the established power structures. She spoke out against corruption, she demanded accountability from elected officials, and she fought to protect the rights of the vulnerable. Grimbley, meanwhile, continued to plot and scheme, but his efforts were increasingly futile. He had lost the support of the community, and he was becoming increasingly isolated and irrelevant. He tried to sabotage Esmeralda's efforts, but his attempts were always thwarted by the townspeople, who were fiercely loyal to her. Esmeralda's influence continued to grow. She was elected to the town council, where she used her position to advocate for policies that benefited the entire community, not just the wealthy and powerful. She helped to establish a free clinic for the poor, a community garden where people could grow their own food, and a scholarship fund for deserving students. She had transformed the town from a place of greed and inequality into a place of hope and opportunity, a place where everyone had a chance to thrive. She had shown them that even the smallest person could make a big difference, that even a simple seamstress could change the world. She had stitched together a new future for the town, one careful stitch at a time. The threads of her legacy were strong and would not unravel easily. The new era was on the horizon. Years passed. The town prospered under Esmeralda's leadership. Grimbley's influence faded into a distant memory. The Lucky Star mine, after a period of slow returns, finally yielded a significant strike, providing further resources for the town's development. And yet, amidst all the changes and the responsibilities, Esmeralda never forgot her roots. She still found solace and satisfaction in her sewing. In her small, sunlit workshop, surrounded by fabrics and threads, she could escape the pressures of public life and reconnect with her inner self. Her sewing was different now, though. It was no longer just a means of survival or a way to express her creativity. It was a symbol of her journey, a reminder of her strength and her resilience. Each stitch was a testament to her courage, her compassion, and her unwavering commitment to justice. She sewed quilts for the nightie, banners for community celebrations, and costumes for the local theater group. She even created a special banner for the Golden Nugget Saloon, replacing the faded and tattered one that had hung there for years. The new banner featured an image of a needle and thread, intertwined with a playing card, a subtle reminder of the night Esmeralda had bluffed her way to victory and changed the course of the town's history. Esmeralda had woven herself into the fabric of the town's history, her threads intertwined with those of her neighbors, her friends, and her fellow citizens. She was no longer just a seamstress. She was a part of the town's identity, a symbol of its spirit, and a reminder that even the smallest person can make a lasting impact on the world. And as she sat in her workshop, the sun streaming through the window, the needle dancing in her hand, Esmeralda knew that her story was far from over. There were still injustices to fight, still challenges to overcome, and still new threads to weave into the tapestry of her community. She looked forward to whatever the future might bring, confident that she could face it with courage, with compassion, and with the unwavering belief that anything is possible, one stitch at a time. Her legacy was secure. She had shown everyone that even a seamstress could change the world.